Hi, I'm Stephanie Firestein. I'm the assistant naturalist here at Thousand Islands, and I am here to discuss the honeybees that we have recently introduced to the Nature Center and the Conservancy. So we have a hive that was brought here by Brian Jacobs. Brian Jacobs is the person who manages our hive. He is the person who brought the hive and the colony to us, and he's also going to be our expert throughout the summer as we continue to observe this hive. So bees are incredibly important. Many people don't like bees, but many people might be allergic to bees. It might not be the honeybee that you're allergic to. So it's kind of an interesting thing to learn a little bit more about these bees. Bees are incredibly important to pollination of farmers' crops, to pollination of the wildflowers, to pollination of our garden flowers. So these are things that we need to remember when we're considering bees and how we need to have bees in our ecosystems. So there's different types of bees. There are solitary bees. So solitary bees are like the carpenter bees, and they're also mining bees. These are bees that don't live in communities. They're usually not aggressive, and they don't make honey. So the bees that are a little bit more concerning for some people are bees that are social bees. So those types of bees would be a honeybee or a bumblebee. And those are bees that live in communities, that they have a very social order to their communities, and they have to protect their hive. That's why some people get really afraid of the honeybees and bumblebees, because they, if you get too close and you bother their hives, they might be aggressive. Typically though, they're just working. They're working to get their nectar, working to pick up some pollen so that they can bring it back to their hive and take care of the babies that are in the hive. So these bees, the honeybees that we have on our property, have been introduced from Europe way back in the 1600s. So a long, long time ago. But because they have become such an important factor to our farmers, we don't consider these bees to be like an invasive species. The only time that they start to act invasively is if they start to compete with bees, our native bees, and they have to compete for the same food resources. So enjoy the next couple of videos that we are introducing to you the life of the bees and the way the beehive works, and a little bit about the functioning and the workings of the beehive itself. So I hope you enjoy this, and if you ever have any questions, please feel free to contact me about the bees. You can always contact me at the Nature Center. Honeybees are really amazing creatures, and the fact that there are 3 different bees, the worker, the drone, and the queen, all working within the same hive, makes them even more incredible. The queen is the most important bee in the hive, and interestingly enough, it only takes the hive 7 days for her to go from being a larva to an adult. They feed her exclusively the best honey and something called royal jelly. You'll learn about that later. She's the biggest of all the bees, and when she is created, she'll leave the hive and mate with at least 10 to 20 drones from other hives. These drones will help her to make sure that she has better biodiversity within her hive. When she returns to the hive, she'll kill the old queen and all of the other eggs that were meant to be queens, and then she starts to lay her own eggs, and that's all she does. She lays up to 1,000 to 1,500 eggs each day throughout the summer, and over 1 million in her lifespan. She can live up to 5 years, but her eggs become fewer as she ages. The next most important bee is the worker bee. The worker bee is the female bee that works within the hive. She is the one with the stingers, but she doesn't lay eggs. These stingers are designed for her to lay eggs if she were the queen, but because she is not the queen, her stinger is only functional as a stinging barb. When she stings something, she actually dies after she stings it because her intestines somewhat pull out of her body. These females come from fertilized eggs and are fed for 28 days. After they hatch, for the first 14 days of their lives, their job is to stay inside the hive, making honeycomb and feeding the babies. They never leave the hive, and this is the only time that they can produce beeswax. These are called nurse bees while they're in the hive. Once they leave the hive, then they become forager bees. So those forager bees, which are still the females, leave the hive now, and their job is to go out and find pollen and nectar. They will find that pollen and nectar often by climbing inside of the flower and getting deep inside. While they go deep inside that flower, they are beating their wings, and the pollen ends up going all over their bodies from the static electricity that happens. So that pollen gets stuck on their bodies, on the little hairs, and then they have to groom that pollen off of those hairs and put them in their pockets on their legs, which they then bring back to the hive, and the nurse bees help them to unload the pollen, and they disperse the nectar from a special compartment in their bodies into cells in the hive that carry all of that nectar. That nectar then eventually becomes honey because of an evaporation process. And when it becomes evaporated enough, they use a special wax covering to cover the cell, and the uncovered cells are still in the evaporation process. That finished product under the covered cells is what we call honey. In addition to the honey, the bees also make something called royal jelly. This white substance that you see that these larvae in is the royal jelly, which allows for the bee larva to mature within the cells. When they have a queen bee, they will feed that queen bee exclusively royal jelly, and then she will eventually become a specialized bee, the specialized bee because of the royal jelly that she's been fed. When she emerges, then she goes through the process of leaving the hive, mating, and coming back, as we discussed earlier. Another job of the worker bee is to maintain the temperature in the hive. It has to stay at a temperature of 95 degrees. So when it's cool outside, the bees work very hard to keep their wings beating so that they generate heat from their bodies and keep that hive temperature at 95. When it's really hot outside, they have to bring that temperature back down to 95. So instead of being on the inside of the hive, they go outside of the hive and cool it down by generating or reflecting that heat out of the hive. Even in the wintertime, they need to maintain a constant temperature of at least 50 degrees. Otherwise, the queen will lose the fertilization ability for those eggs, and the eggs will come out as all drones. Drones are the male bees that come from unfertilized eggs. So those unfertilized eggs only have 16 chromosomes, half of what the female bee has that comes from a fertilized egg. They're a larger larva, but they're only fed for 14 days. They're just fed more so that when they emerge from that cell, they're a larger bee with bigger bodies and bigger eyes. The bigger eyes have a purpose of finding the queen bee when she flies by so that she can mate with as many different drones as possible. Again, to increase that biodiversity within, or the genetic diversity within the hive to keep them stronger. When a queen flies overhead, all the drones will fly up in a swarm to try to mate with her. When she is mating, there are several different drones, 10 to 20 total, that she'll mate with. So even though it looks like they might be fighting, they don't actually fight over her. It just becomes the drone who gets to her first gets to be the one to mate. So kind of the strongest will survive. These drones they seem like they're kind of lazy because they don't do anything. They just kind of hang outside of the hive waiting for a female to go by. But they're really, really important to the diversity of the bees and the longevity of the hive and how well the hive can survive. So that's a little bit about the background and the workings of the hive and the bees within the hive. Now we're going to take a little time to explore our own hive at our nature center. Hi everybody, this hive was brought here by beekeeper Brian Jacobs on May 6th. It's located next to the parking lot behind the split rail fence. It's a newly formed colony that will be a permanent addition to the Conservancy. So you can see the bees arriving and departing, and they enter through the slots at the base of the hive. That base of the hive is where the honeycomb is being produced, and that is where the queen is laying her eggs. These bees that are departing are going off. They're all females. These are the worker bees. They're going off to get pollen and nectar to bring back, which is used to make the honey. So the females, when they emerge as adults, spend 14 days in the hive taking care of the eggs and the larvae, which are the baby bees. So they feed those baby bees honey that's created from the nectar and the pollen that the worker bees, after they are 14 days old, will go out and become scouts. And so they will go and find new sources of food, or will follow another bee to a known source of food. So if you notice, the bees are all flying off the same direction, and they're returning from that same direction. That's where their food source is. So they are all going to that same food source. They communicate to each other by doing a waggle dance, a little dance in the air that shows where the food source is, and they all go to that same area to get their nectar and collect the pollen. So if you look, they're heading down that direction. Somewhere over there is where their food is coming from. If you look carefully, you can almost see the pockets full on the back legs of the bees that are arriving. So the bees will fill their pockets or their pouches with the pollen that gets stuck all over their bodies. They scrape it into those pouches, and they bring those pouches full of pollen back to empty out at the hive. You can see this bee grooming itself outside of the hive, which is actually removing some of that pollen, removing some of the nectar, preparing to leave that inside of the hive. So he's grooming, taking some of that pollen off so that it'll go, as soon as he goes in, he'll leave that in the hive, or she, sorry, it's a female. So these are probably drones. The drones are the males that are of no value to the hive other than mating with a queen if a queen from another hive happens to come around. Otherwise, the drones just kind of hang out. They don't really do anything. They don't go out and they don't collect any of the nectar. They don't bring anything back. They just hang out. It's like a bachelor pad. Some of the bees have the job of protecting the hive, so some of them are just hanging outside of the hive, making sure that nothing is going to come and disturb them or their hive. It's a very interesting hive functioning social community. The honeybee's social structure is so amazing to observe in action. You're welcome to stop by the hive and watch the activity, but please remember not to disturb them. They can be very aggressive if they are disturbed. So beekeeping for many is a hobby, but some consider it a profession where they maintain the hives and they manage the colony within the hives very carefully. These are some images of looking within our hive at this nature center. And our beekeeper, Brian Jacobs, comes by and checks it regularly. You are welcome to stop by the hive anytime and observe the bees. Just be careful, don't get too close, stay behind the fence and not on the grassy area. But you can watch the bees as they come and go and follow their activity to see if they've changed their direction of where they're getting their pollen. So that would be something that might be kind of interesting to sit and observe for a little bit. Also, we are having a honey extraction event somewhere around Labor Day, hopefully. So please come and join us for that. And hopefully, by learning a little bit more of the bees and our beehive on our property, your fear of bees has become a little bit less and your interest in bees has become a little bit more. Thanks for joining me today. And be sure to stop by and take a look at the bees over the weekend.